Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And it looks like next week we are getting a new patch for EVE. I think the most interesting thing that stood out when it comes to the patch notes was actually that the Triglavians are going to be spotted outside of their invasion territories with some sort of scout ships. Now the real question is, will these be scouts like the Lancers that just keep an eye on everything, or will they be aggressive? If CCP wants to add more chaos, they might be aggressive, which does put everything into an even different light, because that tends to not be very friendly to new players. If I'm not mistaken, I once saw a screenshot of lots and lots of wrecks made by the Triglavians around the gate, and it's because the invasion came to one of the rookie systems, and so they got caught completely off guard by something that they just cannot handle. Even I think if you've got like 5 or 10 people that would accidentally start to make up a fleet, but they just started EVE, they're not gonna have a good time in the Triglavian invasions at the moment, or Triglavian, well, I'm not sure how we have to pronounce that, but overall it is interesting that they are continuing with the Triglavian storyline, and I want to take that opportunity to again talk about my idea, which I think is pretty cool potentially, and could actually give EVE Online the benefits of like a seasonal hype, which is something that a Path of Exile has, that a World of Warcraft has with its expansions. And so my thoughts were that at some point we could find an abyssal pocket that is like maybe a dozen systems large just to get started, and that would last for, let's say, 3 months or something like that, and it would have absolutely everything you need. It would have planets, it would have moons, it would have belts, anomalies, signatures, everything. But the restriction is you can only bring a frigate into that abyssal pocket, and so there you can basically start and build anew, try to get something out of that abyssal pocket. At that point we should see the storyline have evolved completely from the Triglavians at the moment being an aggressive force in New Eden to, well, them having become the 5th race with a full ship lineup, maybe even their own structures and all of that stuff, and thus these abyssal pockets is something where perhaps just to get us started, to give us a place to get started at in the central system, you would have a world arc where even the Capsuleers could dock in order to do their thing in that Triglavian, in that abyssal pocket. And then of course you can only bring a frigate in with blueprints, for instance, and then you can try to start up, gather the resources locally, build up maybe your own structures, bigger and bigger ships, no restrictions on that. Or perhaps if you want something that's more player friendly, you can put restrictions on that, and then you can take everything out, perhaps through the world arc or something like that. I think that could be very, very cool. It could be how the Triglavians actually live inside abyssal pocket. They're more like a nomadic race that is forced to constantly find pockets where they can live for a longer period of time in order to maintain their own empire. And so eventually we would find our way into that space as well. I think it could be very cool, and yeah, let's see how things go. Of course, CCP will have their own plans. Next up, we'll take a quick look at the New Eden store. So still the same, we've got the new Sasha skins. I really like the Sanctuary bundle for the Sisters of Eve ships, and then Triglavians are still front and center. As you guys know, I do personally hope that we see even more ships and that eventually they become a 5th race, and then hopefully the type of content I think would be very cool. But yeah, as always, CCP is the one developing EVE Online. I'm just a backseat driver here. Let's move on to the market itself and see what's happening here. And you may already have seen from the ticker that there is a decent amount happening. So let's start with some plex and stuff coming in at 425. And the timestamps, I put them in the description of the video. If you happen to be newer here, just for your information, you can switch to any part of EVE Talk that you want through that. And we can see here in JITA 3.5 million for the sellers. First couple coming in even below 3.5 million. That's where the competition is starting. Buyers are down to less than 3.2 million. That is in JITA. Let's see how we're doing in the player-owned trade hubs, which with the new taxes will have taken up a substantial substantial part of the trade at this point. Less than 3.4 million for the sellers of plex, and then we have the buyers. Here they go up to a bit above 3.2 million, which gives us this chart with a peak at 4.5 million. We have now breaking straight through the 3.5 million barrier. How long and how fast are we going to continue to go down? Personally, I'm looking at this 1-year chart. Look where we started last year, between 2.5 and 3 million. I think this is already very interesting. Lots of momentum. You're buying them now for less than 3.5 million. It is definitely possible to come back from that. But I would see the 3 million mark as the part to keep an eye on before I would personally perhaps consider reinvesting more in plex. That is because I have a pretty healthy stock of plex, which is now decreasing in value by the day, but it is an inflation hedge, so you get to look at it from a much longer perspective than this. And yeah, the reason why, well, we're still perhaps digesting the plex sale that happened about 10 days ago, but that volume spike is not even that major. It's not even that big, so I'm not really seeing that as being the only explanation. We have another one, of course. It is now right in the middle of the summer. People are on vacation. There will be a decrease in activity due to that as well, which generally the people that will bow out for at least a couple of months of EVE Online during the summer will be those that are a bit less active and that will like to, I think, in my opinion, plex their accounts if they're possible. I think it just takes demand away from the plex market, while the most active, the most invested players, well, if they still want to ISK in order to do stuff, they're still gonna buy plex from CCP, bring that to the market, and thus we get this current trend. I think it has more momentum because, of course, the chaos era will have its impact here as well. I am really curious to see what the economic numbers will be for EVE Online with the blackout month. The impact on botting, I think, is still major. I mean, you could say they will adapt and they will move to highsec, sure, but ratting in highsec is not the same as ratting in nullsec, and so I think there will be a major impact from the bots as well due to just decreased effectiveness for them overall, decreasing the inflation that they are bringing to the game. But this is a pretty major turnaround, and as I've said, I am looking at 3 million as an important barrier. I wonder if we'll be able to get there. Next up, we have the multiple pilot training certificate. This one is still digesting that sale itself from the training certificates. You can see this volume spike much more significant with a very sharp decrease. But then I said it took a little bit of time for the volumes to be absorbed by the market, so we get a little bit of a sideways movement. But here I think it is the plex decrease in price that is also being followed through on the multiple pilot training certificate market. We are now again below 1.5 billion ISK sellers coming in. As I've said, just below 1.5 billion. Buyers are going in for less than 1.4 billion on the training certificate. A very significant change here in the market. If you're a newer player, if you're someone that's on the sidelines and that wonders, well, should I play EVE, or perhaps if you've quit due to the plex prices because you do want that omega without having to pay real life money. I mean, this looks very nice. Of course, this is a pretty massive decrease in price here from 2 billion to 1.5 billion, and for plex from 3.5 to less than from 4.5, excuse me, to less than 3.5, and that in just a couple of months. It makes a very, very big difference, I think, for newer players that are trying to earn their way into plex, even if it is not for an omega every month, but perhaps for some skins that they like, perhaps for some injectors, perhaps for what else could you do with plex? So we get the extractors, injectors. I'm not sure if you're gonna go for plex for that, but all of this feels a lot more affordable. Yeah, that was what I wanted to say. Not necessarily for an omega every month, but perhaps just to build up a plex library and then try for every 3 months or something like that. That is completely realistic even for a new player. So yeah, lots of opportunities here. Next up, we have the skill extractor that is following suit very, very quickly, of course, as well. increasing its decline now from 500 million ISK, breaking straight through the 400 million ISK barrier. 381 for the sellers, 369 for the buyers. The bad news on that, I would say, is that this margin is not as large as I would have expected here. So this is one sign that might indicate that a bottom will be found sooner rather than later. But right now, of course, we're still seeing the momentum, and as I've said, there are many forces, I think, at work to make that happen, including perhaps players that are also trying to read the market a little bit. Sometimes it's possible. Next up, we have the injectors. Let's take a look at the large scale injectors that are also massively decreasing in price from 1 billion ISK and now slowly heading towards 800 million ISK. That's like 20% decrease in price in a matter of less than 2 months. Pretty significant. 838 million ISK, so we still have a ways to go for the sellers, but here we also have a 10 million, again not that big. 828 for the first buyers, although you can see it's only 4 buy orders, and then we're getting below 800 million ISK. So it's still a decently narrow margin, but get a couple of those aggressive buy orders out, just 4 of them, and you're looking at buyers below 800 million ISK, which is very, very significant. After that, we have the large scale injectors, similar pattern, a bit of, looks like a slightly slower but more steady decline over the last 1.5 months from 200 million ISK, peak at 210 and currently selling for 171. Buyers coming in at 162. Look at that 8 million margin, almost 9 million ISK margin on the small scale injectors, which is the same as the large scale injector market. Pretty much, just a little bit smaller, but not in line with the 170 to 838 price difference. So this to me indicates that here we can see much more competition at this price range, that there is still a very good chance for these buy orders for the large scale injectors to actually get filled at some points, and that we will be able to continue the decline. So very interesting situation. I think we could go lower. Daily alpha injectors, a bit of a surprise that these are also suffering so much from this, because you're actually buying these straight from CCP. That price normally doesn't change that much. It is definitely an indication that the ISK itself is part of the equation, the ISK generation in the game. How much people are feeling comfortable with paying for items will have an impact as well. And I think that the plex stuff category is different and is declining so rapidly because they feel like this is different from everything else, because you're purchasing that with real life money. So the daily alpha injectors, 54 million ISK for the sellers, 47 million ISK for the buyers. Unless I'm missing a small sale or something like that, this is a bit of a surprise decrease for me, and it definitely also makes the daily alpha injectors much more affordable for alpha players. 70 million, even a peak at 80 million, and now going for 50 million. That is a massive decrease for just a couple of months. So really a massive second leg down here, quite a bit of momentum, and I'm seeing potential to go even lower. My focus is going to be that 3 million price range for the plex market, which would be a third of the price from the peak of this year. That would be pretty damn massive. Next up, we are going to move on to the mineral market, coming in at 1335. Let's go, and as always we'll start with titanium. Slight move back up towards the 7 ISK here on the chart. We're already decreasing back from that, I think, a little bit, but overall very good news here, and this is, we'll see if it's a bit more uniform or not. If we go for GTA prices, we're talking 692 for the sellers, 650 for the buyers, and titanium on a 670. So here there must have been an order when I was checking for the ticker for 670, but basically then the move is about 0% for titanium over the last week. If we take the 692, maybe even an increase of 2 cents over the last week. So titanium doing very well, and actually maintaining a 7 ISK price range around there is very significant. Even historically speaking, this is a great price for titanium, and this increases the value of everything that you do in the game. And that's what I meant with the difference between plex stuff and then everything else in the game. If this goes down in price, it's because people are not willing to pay that much for plex anymore, and there's many other reasons, of course. But if we then see titanium increase in price, that is, I think, specifically an aim that CCP Hilmar mentioned in the podcast about the chaos era in EVE Online, is that they want to give the activities of the players more value in the game again. They want to get away from all the automated wealth generation, also from the massive scaling that you can have sometimes that puts the economy completely out of whack. Even someone mining for titanium in HiSec, that should have value in EVE Online. That should not be something that is completely valueless. And so that's why we're seeing plex and stuff decrease in price. If that's your aim, then that should decrease in price, but the other stuff should actually increase in price, because it becomes harder and harder to get either the necessary ISK, but also the goods itself increasing in value. So pyrite also doing decently well on this 1 yearly chart, but of course one of the big victims of the changes that CCP has done over the last few years to mining ships or compositions and things like that, completely devalued down to 4.5 ISK. This used to be more expensive, much more expensive than titanium, and now we're talking about a great price of 4.5 ISK for pyrite. It is all relative, of course, but we're clearly at a 1 year high point at this junction here. 467 for the sellers, 431 for the buyers. Yeah, one of the best prices we've seen over the last 12 months. Then we have Mixelon, and that is a surprise continued decrease for Mixelon to me, because Mixelon is normally the bottleneck in nullsec when it comes to what they need from after having mined locally. And this one actually heading for a 1 year low point of 55 ISK is pretty surprising. 55.22 for the sellers, 52.04 for the buyers. This is the one that is counter to most of my expectations. Close to 1 year low points. Mixelon, you can see 65.70 is possible for this good. So if you're expecting a general trend of actually increased value for stuff, then this could be the right time to make a move and perhaps start to stockpile your Mixelon or even purchase some of it. But it also feels rather risky to do so, because the mineral market is very much in flux. But yeah, this is a 1 year low point for Mixelon that to me comes as quite a bit of a surprise, especially looking at what titanium is doing. Look at what even pyrite is doing. And then let's take a look at the next one. Here is Isogen, actually also finally getting away from that terrible 15 ISK price range. Isogen used to be more expensive than Mixelon before all of CCP's changes, and now it is the worst, the least desired mineral in the game, because it's just so overproduced compared to the mix of how much of it is needed in production throughout New Eden. To see this one come back is interesting. It is nice, of course, but I must also, I think, mention the volume increase. This looks more like an investment that people have made rather than the market turning around, which I think for titanium there's a much better chance for that. So Isogen is now selling for 1736. Historically speaking, dreadful price, but at least we're away from that 15 ISK range, and then 1587 for the buyer. So we're still not very far, and as I've said, this is volume spike, not big even, but a little bit of a movement as well. I think this is an investment rather than a sustainable turnaround. Next up we have Noxium, mineral that did decently well but used to cost around 1100 ISK. I just want to give you, especially newer players, a little bit of that context of what mining in HiSec. You could get Noxium from HiSec systems, not everywhere, but definitely some of them. Yeah, this used to be worth 4 times what it is worth now, and that is all part of that, well, that constant evolution of the sandbox. And now CCP is looking to tighten everything up and to make even mining for Noxium more worthwhile. In the meantime, it has not been able to maintain its 300 price range in the last week. So you can see on the chart here, 5-day moving average has moved below that. Sellers are now coming in at 293, buyers at 280. So right now we're actually also at a weaker, below average price point for the Noxium market. After that, we've got some former nullsec minerals here. Is Zydrine flat above 500 ISK. This stuff used to be worth way more than that, but it used to be a lot more exclusive as well. Of course, now even in Isaac, we can create our Zydrine sources. 519 for the sellers, 573 for the buyers. Not much to say here. Basically, the market has found its price range for Zydrine, and then Megasite is pretty similar with a slight trend down still. So this one apparently wants to play with 400 disk. I think at least that's where the market is trying to get Megasite at, which again is also a surprise. Historically speaking, Megasite much harder to get than Zydrine and more expensive than Zydrine. Currently selling for 435. I think it's like a slight step up, or basically also sideways movement from last week. 372 for the buyers though. You can see that's a pretty massive margin. So the buyers are just not willing to pay a decent price for Megasite. They want to drive that price down to less than 400 disks. There's not even that many orders, and there are a couple jumps out that are above 400 disks. There's a real desire here for the market to continue to drive the price of Megasite down, and if people are just not willing to pay the price for a higher price for Megasite, well, supply maintains a decently steady pace, which it does. I think here 10 million, 2 million, 2 million, another million here. I mean, this is just, you know, mine from a moon mining activity. Grab the Megasite, you can get it, bring it straight to the market, try to sell it. There's just a lot of competition with these kinds of volumes, and yeah, it's too much still for the market. Then finally we have Morphite, our outlier that jumped to a 1-year high point of around 13,000 disc last week. Gives it back a little bit of ground, but is still trading very respectably at 11,700 disc for the sellers, 11,000 disc for the first buyer, dropping pretty quickly to 10k though, so be careful. Massive margin opening up here. If you still have to sell Morphite for a profit, do so sooner rather than later. But a very surprising and great opportunity with actually a normal price range, still maybe a little bit lower than historically speaking, but Morphite 10k and below that buy opportunity, and then the spikes to well above that are part of its historical cycle, I would say. Next up we have the PI market coming in at 2150. Like that. Let's go over these. My general feeling on this one, or my general expectation, has been that the summertime we actually see something similar to the plex market. That may be a little bit counterintuitive to what I said before, but keep in mind PI is actually a very passive activity in the game, and so there, in my opinion as well, the more hardcore players that that will have fully set up PI planets and complete production cycles will keep that up throughout the summer. But it's the less hardcore players that will drop more in activity, I think, decreasing general demand for PI materials. Now, right now, broadcast nodes is clearly making me a liar, which has been below average for a pretty long time here, especially the last couple of months, dipping to a 1-year low point of less than 1.75 million, and it actually jumps up to an above average price right now, almost 2.2 million for the sellers, 2 million for the buyers. What does become interesting is that we do see some volume spikes, although on most days it's pretty average. The spikes are a little bit higher, so we're seeing, I think, just a little bit more demand, people perhaps prepping for a potential new structure, which I can understand at this point. I mean, if you're gonna speculate on the blackout not going on forever, but CCP not just turning the knob back on for nullsec local, then a structure is the most likely course of action here. So that is I think why advanced PI materials is getting speculated on a little bit more. Then we've got construction blocks holding on at 11,000 disc, right on its average, I would say. Almost 12,000 for the sellers and almost 11,000 for the buyers here. It's, yeah, maybe even a touch above average if you look at the sell price. Consumer electronics then is dropping off to a less than average price, most days landing close to 12,000 disc. It's still 13,400 for the sellers and now 12,700 for the buyers, so a bit of an increase here. Interestingly enough, look at that, buyers in the perimeter tranquility tower, so that does mean that the taxes have moved a substantial amount of trade from GTA 4.4 to the trade tower, to player owned structure. It is a pretty big difference now, and as I've said, I'm really reading this as well as an incentive to try and get trades, try and push people into player owned structures. But then what will be the impact of a potential loss of of asset safety, I don't know. Right now we don't really get anything from CCP, so we don't know if that's actually still on the books. But for now, it does mean that a lot of trade is now moving away from GTAP 4.4 and into the player-owned structures, which before would have been here. I mean, most of these buy orders, there would have been buy orders here, but it would have been clearly a little bit different. They can afford to go higher in price because they pay fewer taxes than the people here in this station. So you're gonna get a real difference, and in bigger volumes as well, for the number of trade buy orders that jump up well above GTAP 4.4 now. Let's take a look at coolants next. After a nice little comeback here, back up to, I think we reached 13 to 14,000 disc on the seller side. It doesn't last that long. We are back down for the coolants. 12,000 disc, 11,800 for the sellers. Buyers coming in at 10,800. Actually, some competition in GTAP 4.4 still. That's a bit of a surprise. But overall, this is now trading around average, I would actually say, if we disregard this one big spike, back down to average. Enriched uranium next. This one is still trading well above average. We're seeing a little bit of hesitation at the tail end here, with the 5-day moving average clearly going back down below the 15,000 disc barrier, but the sellers are still at 15,600 disc. Buyers are coming in at 14,100 disc, and here you can clearly see that perimeter is dominating the more competitive buy orders again. The integrity response drones market actually doing surprisingly well as well. Went up to 2.6 million not that long ago, I think right after ETH Talk last week, and is now maintaining the average price above 2.5 million for the sellers, and then down to just below 2.4 million for the buyers. I'd say this is maybe even a touch above average. This is right on the average. And let's see if there's actually some sellers in. Yeah, there's actually a decently large seller here as well in the Tranquility Trade Tower. I think here though, there's gonna be a bit more hesitation to actually sell in the trade tower. We'll see how that evolves as well. Of course, it's all part of the economic activity in the game. Mechanical parts clearly a little bit below average at this point, playing with 11,000 disc, still 11,900 for the sellers. That's around average, but 10,800 for the buyers is probably a touch below average right here. Nuclear reactors next. This one is flat at 90,000 disc on its daily average. On its 5-day moving average, excuse me. But the daily averages, they keep going above towards what is this, 95,000, and then below to 86,000. That is, well, on this day there's a bit more sellers that win out, and on this day there's a bit more buyers that win out. That gives us this very stable 5-day moving average. Sellers at 95,000, buyers at 86,000, and we're just basically hovering here on the nuclear reactors. Not that interesting in my opinion. The only good news I can see here, slight increase in volume, so perhaps more interest might come back after the summer, and then we'll hopefully see a bit more activity and volatility. Organic mortar applicators, yep, advanced PI materials here, tied to structures mostly. Again, heading for a 1-year high point of 1.2 million. You can see some volume increases as well about a week ago. So it's above 1.2 million for the sellers. I'm going to take a quick look again at, no, this is still GTAS station that is clearly dominating this more expensive good, and then just below 1.2 million for the buyers. That is above average by quite a decent margin. Again, my theory, speculation on an actual structure coming as an answer for some form of NOSIC local, not necessarily, perhaps intelligence tools, things like that. Robotics are going back down, back below 100,000 disc actually. Yep, 99,999 for the first seller, most are just above 100k, and then 97,500 for the buyers. A couple of GTAP buyers actually still winning out, so we still have a little bit of time to digest here, but obviously a bit of pressure here on the robotics as well, but maintaining a decently average price now. Self-harmonizing power cores, yeah, again, we're not really seeing that much of a volume increase, but you can see data points at 2.2 million, sellers at above 2.2 million, not that much availability. We'll take a quick look at the trade trade tower, nope, it's not happening there either. Buyers are still below 2 million, but availability is actually pretty low here, and that means an above average price for self-harmonizing power core, completely counter to my expectation. I was hoping for some real dips like what was happening here on the advanced PM materials, so that you could make an investment on maybe even a longer term project for CCP with more structure and things like that. But nope, actually right now on a bit of a lack of availability sometimes, I think on speculation as well, most advanced PM materials are actually trading above average. Superconductors, after dipping to a 1-year low point here, are making a comeback towards an average price. 12,700 for the sellers is okay. 11,000, still a bit of margin here. That is probably still below average for the buyers. So then we get the test cultures continuing to not do too well. 6,000, just below 7k for the sellers and just below 7,500 is for the buyers. That is still, well, historically speaking, and now really bad. If you're looking for that longer term gamble, this is actually where I would put some ISK. Right now, and then with where mainframes not really breaking out that much, but you can clearly see that we again have a volume increase, and then this heading to more than 2.2 million. Yeah, just above that for the sellers and just below that for the buyers, back to an average price to a slightly above average price. A little bit surprised by the strong performance of advanced PM materials here. Next up we have the advanced moon materials coming in at 30.35. Like that. So let's take a look at these crystalline carbonites. Okay, what we clearly saw is that with the deployment of the Imperium, we had some volatility finally come back to the advanced moon materials, which was generally either playing with low points or staying well below average. And then the Gnostic blackouts came, which has also caused a little bit more volatility and basically brought the prices back towards the average range. Now in the last couple of weeks we saw that because of decreased activity, I would say on the war side of things in Gnostic, which is a natural consequence of the blackout, we had a bit of a decline in price again, but it is good to see crystalline carbonites actually jumping back towards 160 ISK for the sellers and 150 for the buyers. So this is here bit of a jump back to that average 160 range after having to give back a little bit of ground. Next up we have the Fernite carbide that is actually maintaining a price of around 150, so that is still not bad. 152 for the sellers, 140 for the buyers. This is still around the average price as well, well away from that bottom price and this period of going for really low prices. Then we have the titanium carbide, which I think had the war spike. Yep, this one had the war spike up to almost 300 ISK. Has to give back some ground on that. But if we're looking at, if we try to disregard this one, you can look at like 200, 190 as an average range. We're at 180 for the sellers, 162 for the buyers. So here, still a little bit of pressure at the tail end, but you can see last week 190 to 200 was possible. So this is still away from like the 150 bottom range, the 175 below average range. They're trying to fight back a little bit, which I think is good news. And then we have tungsten carbide, which also knew a late spike here up to 250. Bottom prices 175 and below 200 is not that great. Unfortunately, yeah, no, look at that, 225 for the sellers, 195 for the buyers. Yeah, back to that average price, decently good price for these carbonites type materials. Then we get the meta materials, of course, which are, I think, if I'm not mistaken, a step up from these. And here we have that very same thing, right? You've got this, all right, we're below average, constant pressure away from 17,500 ISK. One little spike, but then well below average with bottom price at 15,000 ISK. And then here finally in July, a bit of a comeback, and we're managing to get back to 17,000 to 18,000 almost for the sellers and 16,400 for the buyers. A big margin here, except for in New Caldari, someone is buying at a competitive price, just 1,000 units. That won't last too long. So here I would personally say that, yeah, we're back on an average price. Sellers are winning out when it comes to who gets to trade in these photonic meta materials, but there is a big margin, so a big downward potential. Next up, we get the plasmonic metamaterials. Again here, look at that. First part of the year, 20k and below. That was not that great. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 steps up, and we're back at, look at that, even in the last couple of weeks here, going back up to well above average price. 24,000 for the sellers, 23,600 for the buyers. Surprisingly narrow margin for such a high price here. And so as a result, great time. Plasmonic, yeah, metamaterials, yeah, that was the next one. Then we have the nonlinear metamaterials, which had also, again, yeah, January, February, really well below 25,000 ISK. 1, 2, 3 steps up. Now here, this one is a little bit different, heading back for that average 25,000. It's only one seller though, and then we get 26,000 for the sellers, 25,000 for the buyers. So there's a bit of hope that we actually bounce up from this if this guy gets picked up and then no one comes in to drive the price back down again. I think it is possible, considering the trends that we've seen in some of these goods. And here we get Terra metamaterials. Same thing, bad first half of the year, well below 25,000 most of the time. But here, finally, here in July, you come back to 27,500, and we're actually landing back at 25,400 for the sellers, 25,000 for the buyers, back on a decent average 25,000 price range. So not bad. A lot of these, as I've said, a bit more volatility and really trying to defend that average price. So that's pretty good. We get the other stuff which can give us a bit of an idea on the trends. So the fermionic condensates also had a nice spike during the deployment, I think, and then a second spike up to a 1-year high point of 110,000 ISK. But then look at that decline back down to 90,000 ISK. So sellers 91, buyers 88,000. This is back to a less than average price, unfortunately. Ferrogel, same pattern here. That does not bode well for the rest, to be honest, for the upcoming weeks, because here we had, again, June, I think that's more deployment, up to above 50,000. The second spike there as well, but now we're back down to 45,000, 46.5 for the sellers, 46.5 for the buyers as well. All right, just above that, but you can clearly tell that we would love to play at a range of 47.5 to 50,000, I think, as an average range. I'd still call this below average right now. Fullerites, same thing here. You can even see the pressure in the last month or so, and then here at the point below 900 ISK, we're talking 950 for the sellers, 922 for the buyers. This is not too good. Hypersynaptic fibers, June spike. Excuse me, I would call this a blackout spike up to 15,000 ISK. Look at that volatility back down, bit of a bounce back up, but if we're not well above 13,000 ISK, it's 13,400 and then 12,500 for the sellers. Quite a bit of a margin here. We are again, I think, at a risk to get back to a less than average price. And then the nano transistors, one exception, continuing to slowly increase in price over the last 2 months or so. That is not bad at all. So this one is 5,800 still, and 5,600 for the buyers. If you happen to have some of this as an investment from earlier in the year, then this is a decent time to sell. And then we have the phenolic composites. That's actually also going counter, a little bit less volatility with the deployment and the blackout, but now actually a slower increase to back towards that 2,500, which I would call a normal price. It's still below that for the sellers, 2,200 for the buyers, so we have a ways to go, but at least one of them is showing signs that we're not in a general decrease for the other materials. Ceramic fibers, that's more the pattern that we know, right? Bottoms at 400, this period here below average, well below 500 ISK, and then finally in June we get back above 500. Doesn't last too long, but now with the blackout we are trying to stay in that range. 496 for the sellers, 460, 470 for the buyers. At least it's away from that bottom and well below average price range. But yeah, these other goods here are clearly showing that pressure is mounting again. If you have an opportunity to sell at a profit, I personally would do so. Next up, we have the Tech 2 ships coming in at 38.05. Like that. And let's see, well, with pressure mounting, I think that here we have to look for low points and potential buy opportunities. The Aries trading well below 30 million, very flat over the last couple of months. What's the trend at the tail end here? And going back down, we're talking 27 million for the sellers, 24 million for the buyers. That is definitely pretty cheap on the buy orders already. but has been like that for the last couple of weeks at least. The Basilisk went a little bit low here during deployment of the Imperium, but then a bit of an overreaction, so we went down to 210 million ISK, obvious buy opportunity, and now unfortunately that's over. 242 for the sellers, 226 for the buyers. That's like the in-between place, which we don't like. Then the Cerberus actually went up a little bit and is now again on the in-between place as well, I would call it. 272 for the sellers, 250 for the buyers. Nope, that's like selling a bit late, you know, you're never gonna get that good a profit out of it. Buying, nope, that's still well away from the bottoms. Then we've got the Crow. This one is landing at a price well below 30 million ISK. Let's see where the buyers are at compared to 25 million would be interesting. We're talking 29 million for the sellers, less than 25 million for the buyers. That's still a yes for me on the Crow if you're looking for that Tech 2 ship investment. Then we've got the Guardian, same pattern here, June deployment, a bit of an overreaction. So we went down to that 200 million low point and now recovered. 250, 260 in fact for the sellers, 222 for the buyers. That's actually almost a decent sell price if you still bought at 200 million, but overall this is again the in-between place. Then we've got the Heretic, very difficult in my opinion to be trading in the interdictors, because unlike a lot of the other Tech 2 ships during the deployment we saw them not move at all, and so now we actually have a little bit of a recovery to 80 million ISK for these ships on a lack of availability. 82 million, 83 million for the sellers, still 73 million for the buyers. You're just not gonna be able to sell that well, and so active trading here seems to be out of the question for me. Hound, another spike, a bit of a surprise to see this spike up now, but we're back above 35 million ISK. You could have bought it for probably 25 million about a month ago. Now it's 37 million for the sellers, 31 for the buyers. 25 to 37, that's a decent good margin. That's a trade that you should definitely make if you grabbed them. Then we've got the Ishtar here. That was a pretty incredible pattern. 1 year low point, 1 year low point, about 2 months straight with 1 year low points going for less than 200 million ISK at some point. And then the Vexor Navy issue nerf came, and all of a sudden the Ishtar found its niche again, up to 250, up to 280, and now still trading above 230. Yeah, 235 for the sellers, 221 for the buyers. Normal average price, not much to say. Buy them if you use them, otherwise wait for a better opportunity. Manticore volatility, the trend here at the tail end is finally down to a less than average price, but where are the buyers? 28 million, alright, and 32 million for the sellers. A bit too much availability, so here 28 million for the buyers. If we try and generate that line, you can clearly see that that is not bad to jump in. A bit like the Crow, it's been here for well, maybe not even that long, so this looks interesting if you need that investment. Then we've got the Munin, slow evolution up for 2.5 months, up to 300 million ISK, to 79 for the sellers, 254 for the buyers. Bit of a lack of availability here as well, but you can see that the trade volumes are quite bad. Then we've got the Nemesis. That's a lot more interesting, of course. Unfortunately, not doing well during the deployment and the blackout, but then we had that late July jump up to 38 million ISK. Right now we're recovering from that. Sellers are coming in. Oops, excuse me, I just hit my microphone. Sellers are coming in at 31 million, buyers at 29 million. Yeah, that's the recovery phase. You don't always have either a sell opportunity or a buy opportunity. And this week it looks like for a lot of these Tech 2 ships we're right in between. Then we get the Oneros, same thing, right? Came from 180 million. I don't like the volumes here. Basically recovered back to its 200 million average, so that's a no. And then the Purifier, another surprise spike after landing at 30 million. So I never pulled the trigger because the buyers never went low enough, but look at that. They're basically gone from the market. That is 9 jumps out. We've got 1 in perimeter here, selling for 40 million ISK, but in general in Jita we're just out of them. 55 million. It's gonna be a pretty big spike here, and yeah, showing that the stealth bombers, in my opinion, are still the king of the volatility. Look at these spikes up to 40, and that those turn out to be baby spikes, because now we get one up to 50 million ISK for the Purifier. This does make the Manticore buy order at 28 million look very, very juicy, honestly. So Purifier, surprise spike, and was it the Hound? That's also decent. pretty damn decent right here as well. Okay, then we get the Saber Interdictor, try to go up as well to 70 million ISK, now dropping down. This almost looks interesting. Where are these buyers? 60 million ISK for the buyers of Sabers, 65 million for the sellers. That is well below average, and if we try to get 60 million to show up on the charts, yeah, you get a ways to go. Jesus. Yeah, that is definitely pretty interesting. They're buying right here now for the Saber. I do have everything, yep, in the trade tower, in Cheetah. Long term, yep, I think that you should try to grab a couple of Sabers at 60 million. This is not going to be for a Twitch trade, because for some reason interdictors are not budging at all, even with a massive deployment like a deployment by the Imperium. So this is not something that looks like it's in the meta. For some reason it's just not there. But 60 million, I mean, look at that on the chart. That's practically a must. Then we've got the Scimitar, which is landing at 230 million. So here we get another late war spike up to 300 million ISK. Now it's 230, 206 for the buyers. You can see where we want the bottoms at. 190-ish would be the dream. So that's, again, not really where we want to be. And then finally, the Stiletto is also flat here in between. So yeah, stealth bombers, that is pretty damn cool. Purifier spike up to 50 million ISK, and then the actual buy opportunity in the Manticore as well. I still like the Crow, and then yeah, the surprise here, Saber buy orders 60 million ISK. That is so much below the chart that I think I will again try to grab a cheap Saber myself. Next up, we have the Tech 3 ship market coming in at 45.20. Like that. Let's take a look here at the destroyers first. Confessor moving its way up to above 40 million. Is 41 million for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers. Noticeable margin, but look at the volumes. Availability is far from crazy. Definitely in line with 41, above 40 million X price range. 13, 36, 29, 15. This is okay. For some reason we dried up a little bit and allowed the price to go back up. Basically, people have been producing other things, bringing other destroyers to the market is the most likely explanation for this increase in price to an above average price of above 40 million. Where's the answer? Here's the answer. Look at that. Hecate went up to almost 50 million ISK and is now on the decline. So we should see in the Hecate 46 million, and yes, indeed, that is where the production is. 83, 32, 50. This is a healthy market. Full front page in the last 24 hours. 42 million for the bar. So there's still margin, but this is going to start to put more and more pressure on the price. And at 40 million here, well, we still have a ways to go, but that looks like the price where things slow down, generally speaking, for the production. This is well above that, so the Hecate is the focus of whoever can make destroyers at the moment. This is where they want to bring their ships because they're selling so much better. The Jackdaw is actually at around 40 million. It's also slight slow trend up here, so what I'm expecting is a bit more availability, exactly at 41 million ISK, and more availability than the Confessor. So hey, Confessor, last 24 hours, half a page, but look at the volumes, they're quite a bit less. And then if you compare that to the Jackdaw, that's more than half a page in as the fresh orders, and so this is putting a bit more pressure on that, staying from that 40 million. The Jackdaw, I think, is in all likeliness the most popular of these ships, especially in PvE. The Jackdaw does have its place, and so I think that's why it is still commanding a 40 million price range, despite the fact that its availability is so much higher than the Confessor. There are also, of course, some changes in popularity that are part of the equation. And then we've got this Vapel that also went up to well above 40 million to 44 million, but now is back down. 39 million for the sellers, 34 million for the buyers. Availability, that's in line with the Confessor, maybe even a little bit more than that. And here I think popularity plays a role as well. The normal price for this Vapel is probably not gonna be 40 million, is because it is far less popular, whereas the Confessor still definitely has its place, also in Nullsec, if I'm not mistaken, for the doctrines there. And so here 40 million, we go well above that on a little bit less availability. Overall, I've been saying that for the last couple of months, but I'm really impressed and really happy with what I'm seeing in the tactical destroyer market. You are seeing logical market forces doing their thing in this market. Something jumps up to a much higher price, well, you see a lot more availability, a lot more supply come in, which drives the price back down, which will eventually somewhere else mean less supply, which means increased prices in that other tactical destroyer. This is really amazing to see, in my opinion. Overall, is this great for trading? Not that much. Because generally what we've seen in the tick 3 markets being the opportunity is that during the summer you get a massive oversupply situation. Again, on that same theory, those that have those supply chains going tend to just, you know, be hardcore enough in EVE Online to keep playing all year long, whereas, well, people that then fly and lose these ships and consume these ships tend to maybe drop off a bit more in activity. This summer though, at least in the destroyer market, we are not seeing that at all. Next up, let's take a look at the cruisers. Here is the Legion spiking up to 190 million, is close to a 1-year high point, 200 million in fact for the sellers, 171 for the buyers. Quick look at sellers outside of JITA. Nope. Alright, that's a bit of a surprise because taxes make a pretty big difference here. I guess that people are quite wary of a potential end to the asset safety, but this is what I was a little bit afraid of. Availability is terrible, and this is a complete relisting. And here what we noticed is that if you saw the EVE talks in this period, that despite these really low prices, we had almost zero availability of these ships. I would not be surprised if we had even less than the 250 to 60 that I'm seeing on the market right now, when the price was 140 million ISK. And so that is just primed for complete manipulation. Buy everything, increase the price, and then just put it up here with 206 units at 200 million. You get a bit of competition below that, but the volumes are just so bad here that you know, it can be very, very volatile. And then you'd say, man, that looks pretty juicy for trading. You could have bought these for 140 million. Now you're selling them at 200 million ISK. Sure, but the volumes are just terrible here. It's going to be very tricky to try and do that trade with 5 or even 10 legions, in my opinion. And this is only for people that have really, really big wallets and that are willing to take that kind of a risk. Because if you put all your ISK to get those 206 at 200 million, well, you're gonna come be very disappointed, because there will still always be people that are competing with you at that range. So you gotta have extra ships ready to still try and get that profit on some kind of sales. It's very difficult to do, but it is very much doable in the tactical cruiser market. The Legion is actually going back down a little bit in price over the last week, 190 to 180 on the chart. Here, same thing, right? May, July. Sure, you could have definitely bought 1 or 2 of these ships. But it always felt very, very risky, because despite the fact that we had Lokis at 150 million ISK, availability was way less than this, was even less than this. So here we have some supply coming in, driving the price back down from 190 plus to 187. The buyers are at 169 here. It's not a 1-year high point, it's not complete manipulation. This is the most popular cruiser as well, so I think biggest volumes, hardest to completely manipulate. And now we have the Proteus that's going back up to 180 million. Same thing here, right? May 130 on 0 availability. Look at that, not even a full page. We're talking, what is this? Less than 150 Protei, I think, on the JITA market. Anything outside of it, that's a no. Last 24 hours, we're seeing 15 of them come in here. 171 for the sellers, 157 for the buyers. Yeah, this just could go anywhere apparently, just because it's not that popular. And now we've got Tengu, that's actually pretty flat below 180. It's 173 now for the sellers, 159 for the buyers, and availability is a little bit better. Tengu, Loki, Tengu PvE, right? That's the main reason. Loki generally the best, and then the Legion, I think PvP has its place. Proteus, yeah, poor Proteus, by far the least popular. And so yeah, this is completely a strange market, completely different from the destroyer market actually, because what we're seeing now is that the Tengu is back on a more average price, on higher availability than at its low point. That is just something that is very, very difficult to explain. And my biggest fear was something like this with the Legion, that you could very much buy a couple hundred of them and then just relist them at a massively higher price, which I think is exactly what happened here in my opinion. So yeah, the cruiser market, very risky, very different, high potential. I mean, if you bought at 140 and you do manage to sell for 195 or something like that, now you get a pretty big trade, but very difficult to do just because of the abysmal volumes and popularity of these ships at the moment. Next up, we have the extra products coming in at 53.45. And I chose the compressed ores. A lot of you guys actually agreed with that, so I actually put like a post that I can now make on the YouTube channel as well, asking if anyone had any thoughts about the extra product. So I may try to do that more often, although sometimes I'm just set on a path. Like for instance, if I decide that I do want to go for all of the faction, frigates, cruisers, battleships, just to get a feel again for those, to show that correlation normally with faction warfare. It's a very interesting category, so sometimes I'm stuck on my ways, but other times I might actually ask you guys what you think. And so people did agree that compressed ores was a very interesting suggestion. So let's press compressed. Let's look for, I think it's gonna be in manufacturing and research, and here we go. So it's a pretty damn massive list. We're not gonna go over all of these, sorry about that, but we are going to go about some of them where I might have some insights and I'm curious to see. So for instance, we know that titanium is actually doing pretty well, so I'm really curious about the feldspars. Here's compressed concentrated feldspar, bottom at 1500 ISK for most of the year, clearly trading above average, bit of pressure at the tail end, currently selling though for 2400 ISK on not great availability, 2000 ISK for the buyers, 2400 ISK guys, that is all the way up here on the chart. That is not bad. I'm actually going to quickly take a look at the trade hub. Only one sell order here, so it's not like we are missing out on that. Yeah, that is not bad at all. Well above average and a great sell price. Let's take a look at the feldspar itself then. Where is it? Yeah, that's going to be all the way down here. It's not an easy category to talk about, but here we get compressed feldspar itself. You can see bottom again at 1500, same as compressed. That's interesting. And then we have 2000 is currently as the average price. Sellers 2200 is. So here, this also is very interesting in my opinion. You can see the average price is around 2000 ISK. Sellers though 10% above that, buyers a bit below that. So here we have this strong competition where on some days you get sellers that do win out, so you get a little bit of an above average on the daily price, like here and here. But then on most days it's actually the buyers that tend to win out. So people come in with their compressed feldspar and are saying 250, 240 ISK difference between sellers and buyers. I'm just gonna straight sell for 2000 ISK. I'm done with that. So that is definitely part of this market as well. Let's take a look at compressed dense feldspar just as the last one. I think we'll have by far the best margin here because it is going to be the rarest as well, of course. So here bottom 1500 yet again, currently selling for, well, lack of availability, 2800 ISK. Yep, there is strong demand for titanium, and there is very strong demand as well apparently for the compressed feldspar goods. Very much an opportunity for high-sec miners. I mean, focus on feldspar, and rather than turn it into titanium right away, compress it. Look at that. If you can get some compressed dense feldspar, I think 2800 ISK is going to be a pretty good price if you would convert that, compare it to the titanium price. So one that was requested was it Hedberg guide, I think. We was doing really badly. Yeah, exactly. So here you can clearly see this is something completely different. It's hardly being traded. It's compressed Hedberg guide, and currently selling for 47,000 ISK. Buyers are coming in at 35,500. I'm not sure if I'm gonna somehow be able to make the calculation here, because I would need to get to Hedberg guide itself, but basically the comment was that this is even below the price of Hedberg guide itself when it is not compressed. And why is that happening? Well, the answer is going to be this, in my opinion. The mix of minerals, pyrite, second biggest loser in the mineral category when it comes to all of the changes. Isogen, biggest loser by far. Noxium held on, but was already in a really bad place. I mean, 300 ISK, and we keep saying it's doing well for the year. This stuff used to cost 1100 ISK, so it is really terrible. And then Zydrine, same thing, went down massively with moon mining. And so this is the worst ore that you can get when it comes to the comparative price. There's no titanium, there's no Mexlon, which was the bottleneck. There's nothing really rare in there, especially there is no titanium. That is going to play a very, very big role. This is about as bad as it gets when it comes to the ore composition. This is completely not, this is the very, very last type of ore Hedbergite which you would mine if you're looking for some kind of efficiency. Basically, I think that's the answer. I mean, it's the worst. It's pyrite, it's isogen. That's just terrible. Pyrite should be more expensive than titanium, and it is like half the price. Isogen should be more expensive than Zydrine by a decent margin, and it costs like 17 ISK. Most of the time it costs 15 ISK. So yeah, it's just terrible, and it's gonna be its composition. That means it's completely a dead market, despite the fact that generally speaking we're doing okay in the mineral market right now. Yeah, we saw the big difference, right? Compressed Hedbergite, and then we get compressed concentrated Felspar. That's actually trading well above average here. We'll take a look at maybe compressed Arcanor as well. Quick look at the mix: titanium, Mexlon, Megasite. This ought to be pretty popular in Nosik, in my opinion, especially for these first two. And here you can see bottoms at 30,000 ISK, currently selling. Is that really 30,000 ISK? No, 300,000 ISK. There, look at that. 360, so 20% up, about there. 360,000 ISK is around here on the market. Again, what you do notice is that it's both sellers and a buyer's market. On some days you're able to sell this for more than 400,000 ISK, and on some days the buyers win out and they can go below 350,000. It's very much in a live market, lots of trading being done. It is quite handy, of course, to be able to move minerals around. Compressed ores are very, very valuable. And we'll go over a couple more of these. Azure Plagioclase, a bit of a surprise, but it's the same surprise as the Mexlon surprise, right? This is a big source of Mexlon. The other is pyrite, and then we get some titanium in there. This one is not doing too well. Bottom 5,500 ISK, highs 6,500 ISK, currently selling for 6,000 ISK. Lack of buyers clearly visible here. So this is very interesting. Not something that I had noticed before, but the compositions is really starting to have an impact on the popularity of the compressed ore itself. Look at that difference between compressed Arcanor, compressed concentrated Felspar, and then even something like Plagioclase, which I used to mine a hell of a lot, now finds itself in a below average position. Let's take a look here at Bistot, back above average, and then we'll take a quick look at the composition. Yeah, Zydrine Megasite combo, still pretty decent. I think they are still you know, decently expensive minerals compared to everything else, although at the tail end we do see a bit of a drop off here as well. We're not gonna go through the ice, but then we get some spodumene also, right, well above average. A little bit of decline at the tail end here. Titanium, Mexlon, and then pyrite isogen, yeah, not that great, but to 2,200 Mexlon and lots of titanium, I think will make the bright spodumene a bit more popular. And then we get nice, which is not doing well, 130 as the bottom. Buyers are well below that, even sellers are below that. Let's take a quick look at its composition. Yeah, isogen, pyrite, Mexlon. Don't have titanium, you're not doing well at the moment. That is definitely the case. Then we've got some scordite, which is, if I'm not mistaken, titanium pyrite, decent chunk of titanium, so this one is doing quite okay as well. Arcanor, I think, was doing okay. Crimson is, yeah, not being traded enough to make lots of sense of. Crocite, bit above average, selling 350 to 400,000 ISK. Yep, that's not bad, and look at that. Pretty decent. Well, titanium, Noxium, Zydrine, that is definitely an okay one as well, in my opinion. We still have some Bistot here. Looks on the average. That's going to be an ice product, I think. Yep. Dark Ogre. Alright, this one is doing okay as well. look at that, normal price or bottom price 75,000 disk, even 80k. Now complete lack of availability, 110,000 disk. Tritanium, lots of tritanium, isogen, and then some noxium. So not the best composition, but apparently not very available. That plays its role as well, of course. Let's see, dazzling spodumene, that's being traded enough and is doing decently well, holding on to 450, even almost 500,000 disk for the sellers. We'll take a quick look at that one again. Yep, tritanium, Mixalon, that is not bad. I think in Nasdaq this will be very popular to buy here and to bring back in, and so it is commanding a nice bit of a margin here. And then Fernite, Kernite not doing too well, 15,000 disk bottom price, and one buyer, most of them actually below that, 16,000 disk. And this one we are seeing, okay, that's actually not a bad mix, but I'm guessing that the tritanium being below Mixalon is what is doing it here. You get some tritanium, but really not a lot, not enough to make it worth the effort. We still have Umber to look at, historically speaking also a really bad one, actually something that you wanted to avoid. Now we've got a decent chunk of tritanium, and I think that's making up for the pirate isogen sources, because it's actually doing somewhat okay, selling for 8,200 disk, buyers coming in at 7,000 disk. This is very interesting, although you still have trends, right? Especially if I look at some of the high-sec ones. So let's again quickly jump on concentrated. You still have clearly, you get trends. This was not a great time to be a miner. We're finally doing a little bit better after the deployment of the Imperium and the Nasdaq blackout. And then here for Scortite, same thing, right? This was not a great time to be a miner. Very stable at 2,000 disk, and now finally a little bit of a move up here. What else do we have easily from high-sec? Pyroxeris, I forgot to take a look at that one, but again you can see these bottoms here was not good, and then now here in July we finally find ourselves at 5,000 disk and more, 5,400 disk for this one, for instance. You have these trends, but you are seeing more differences depending on A, the availability, and B, the mineral composition. I think this one is doing so badly. No, it was not. Yeah, was it hemorphite? Nope, it's not. Where the hell are you? From the comments. The H, I think it was. Hedbergite. And that is pyrite, isogen. Yeah, no tritanium, pyrite and isogen in there. Not doing too well, I think. I think that's my explanation. If you have another explanation, definitely feel free to take a look at that in the comments. But considering this, what we see here, I would highly recommend miners to compress first before deciding to go straight for the mineral price range, because there are opportunities here. I'm definitely seeing opportunities in the harder to get, but you can get it from moon mining, the Arcanor, and then tritanium, because of what tritanium, so feldspar, because what tritanium is doing is they definitely doing very well as well. It definitely is gonna pay to keep an eye on the market, to take a look at availability, and to try to sell these at the right price. So don't go full minerals. I would say if you're mining, definitely at least some of it, put it into compressed ores and see if you can't find a buyer that needs it somewhere else. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Very much appreciate all the comments that you guys gave on the suggestion post. And yeah, that's gonna be it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.